I know it's recording this, but I got to get to the right spot so I can. All right, so now, Catherine didn't like Russia. She thought Russia was a backward nation, a bunch of hicks in the sticks. And is she right? Yeah, kinda. So she really didn't want to do much with Russia domestically. Now, most rulers, whether they be American, Russian, French, British, whatever, most rulers are going to have a focus, an emphasis. They're going to focus on international issues. They're going to focus on domestic issues. They're going to rebuild the military, not worry about the economy, or they're going to fix the economy, not worry about the military. Okay? Catherine certainly, now Peter focused on everything. All right? He focused on everything. He wanted to expand the military, fix things at home, fix this, because he had that tremendous energy. Catherine didn't have that tremendous energy. Catherine focused more on international issues. She was obsessed with the West, how everybody dressed, the clothes they wore, their relations with Western Europe, trade with Western Europe. But she really didn't care about Russia itself. So she left Russia to the boyars and said, you guys handle it. If there's a problem, you handle it. If there's a complication, you handle it. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to mess with it. You guys deal with it. Now, are the boyars okay with that? Yes. Why? They're going to get a tremendous amount of power out of this deal. And they become very powerful and very influential because Catherine just kind of turns things over to them and doesn't really worry about it. And so the boyars abuse, enslave, just absolutely crush the serfs. And things are not happy in Russia. The serfs become very discontent. The serfs don't like the boyars. And of course, who do they want to protect them from the boyars? Catherine. So they go talk to Catherine about it, and she says, Je comprends pas. I don't understand, because she's speaking French and they're speaking Russian. So it was just this weird relationship that she had. The boyars treated the peasants cruelly, and she really didn't handle it well. But it was her focus was on all things French. Therefore, she didn't get that the people were discontent. So she just said, boyars handle the problem. And the boyars said, well, we have some uprisings we need to handle. And she'd say, how do you handle them? And they'd say, well, we need 1,000 men to go put down this rebellion. Okay, take them. And then they'd go kill a bunch of serfs. And so she just gave them total authority to do whatever they wanted as long as it didn't affect her. Okay, so towards the end of her life, she started to realize that her son was an idiot, just like his dad. I can't even remember her son's name. Was it Peter? No, that was her grandson. Yeah, that's not son. That should be grandson. Oh, no, her son was Paul. That's right. Wait, no.
Google.
Her son wasn't Paul.
Sophie, just Google it.
Are you Googling?
Sophie, go ahead.
Alright.
Hurry up.
Oh,
No, there's no password on it.
Hurry up.
David.
Hurry up.
you can pause it. Adopt.
So, her son Paul rules for 5 worthless years. It is Paul. She did nothing to prepare Paul to rule. She didn't want him to rule. She didn't want him to be ready to rule. Because as soon as Paul was 18 years old, what could he do anytime he wanted? Take over and say, I'm the czar, I'm ready to run the country. So she never told him that. She just let him go eat Cheetos and play video games. And so he becomes this worthless ruler. Now, Paul did do one important thing, though, as a czar, and that was have a son. And he has a son whose name was Alexander. Now, this is Catherine's grandson. She actually spent quite a bit of time with Alexander. She really did a lot of work with him to educate him, to teach him how to be a ruler, how to be a czar. She kind of ignored her own son, but boy, she worked hard on her grandson. Why? Because she knew she'd be dead before her grandson could come to power. And so she really spends a lot of time working with Alexander, not so much with Paul. Under Paul, basically nothing happened for 5 years. Okay? Wasn't anything bad necessarily, but it wasn't anything good either. Okay? So Alexander, as ruler, had been trained by his grandma to rule. Oops. And for the first 10 years of his reign, nothing really important happened. He was the Tsar of Russia. He ruled Russia. He had learned from his grandmother to trust the boyars and let the boyars and the serfs kind of rule themselves. And really, nothing significant happened during the first 10 years of his reign or so. But then, in 1812, a new force had shown up on the European front. That force was? Who? Not the British. The French, under the leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, and in October of 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia. Now understand, up until 1812, Napoleon had been building an empire in Europe. Now, where did Napoleon get his start? Well, back in 1789, there was a revolution in France. And in that revolution, the people rebelled against the king and queen of France, which of course bothered Catherine to no end because she loved everything French, including the king of France, who was a distant cousin of hers. Actually, the queen was a distant cousin of hers. Marie Antoinette was the wife of King Louis XVI. She was a distant cousin of Catherine's because she was also they were both from Germany. They were both German princesses. So in 1789, there's a revolution in France, and the people rebelled, and they cut off the head of the king. Okay, they got mad. There was no food. There was no bread. The king was a dork. They cut off his head. Then the guy who cut off the head of the king became very powerful, and people became nervous that he was going to become the next king, so they cut off his head. Okay, so then the guy who cut off the head of the guy who cut off the head of the king became very powerful, and everybody got nervous, so they executed him. Then they assassinated the guy who executed the guy who cut off the head of the guy who cut off the head of the guy who cut off the head of the king. Then they cut off the head of the guy who cut off the head of the guy who assassinated the guy who cut off the head of the guy who cut off the head of the guy who cut off the head of the king. Then they executed the guy who... Okay, you get the point now, right? Things just got crazy stupid in France. After the American Revolution, what happened? We set up a government, and everybody went back to their life. But in France, things got crazy. People are literally running around like chickens with their heads cut off because their heads are cut off. Okay, things get crazy in France. So, out of this chaos, what do people want on our pendulum theory of power? Stability. And here comes the 5'2" Napoleon to provide stability. A military leader who won a battle in Germany. Yay! Because they're saying, when all of these revolutions are going on in France, what's happening to the borders of France? As France is getting weaker because there's no political stability, the borders are shrinking, and the British are invading, the Germans are invading, the Spanish are invading, the Italians are invading, and France is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Finally, Napoleon wins a battle. Yay! Let's give him power. Okay. He wins another battle. Yay! He wins another battle. Yay! He wins another battle. Yay! He's proving to be a brilliant military strategist. So they make him the Emperor of France. He then goes to war with Spain and wins and puts his brother as the king of Spain. He defeats the Italians. He defeats the Germans. He defeats the Austrians. He conquers virtually every country in Europe with the exception of, not Russia, even before them,
Britain.
the British. Those stinking British. Because what's the advantage the British have over every other country in Europe? They're an island nation with a tremendous navy. So Napoleon even tries to attack the British with his navy. The problem is the British Navy is about twice as big and about 10 times better. They wipe out Napoleon's fleet. Now understand, Napoleon had built this economy, built this civilization, built this empire on war, much like Hitler in World War II. You build it on war, what do you need to fuel your economy? War. Well, he's defeated everybody in Europe except the British, and he can't beat them because that stupid island thing. So, where does he turn his attention? To Russia in 1812. Okay, so from 1789 until 1812, that's kind of the synopsis of what's gone on in Europe. Now, when Napoleon invades Russia in 1812, Napoleon's best military weapon is his cavalry. What's cavalry? Horses. He's got like 125,000 men on horses. And that was really what made Napoleon's military conquest of the rest of Europe so effective, is because he was a master at utilizing that cavalry against his enemy. So Napoleon invades Russia. And understand, Napoleon is using cannon. He's using guns. He's using artillery. He's using cavalry. The Russians are using pitchforks. The Russians have no guns. Because what have they been doing for the last 70 years under Catherine and Paul and Alexander? Farming and hanging out. They have not modernized. They have not westernized. All of these fears that Peter had have now come to fruition. And so the people of Russia are going to now struggle. Oops, I guess I'm not quite ready for that. So Napoleon invades, and the Russians are fleeing across Russia. I mean, they can't run away fast enough. Napoleon advances. Notice, Napoleon has taken his army from Paris, across Germany, across Austria, through Poland, into Russia, and now he attacks Russia. His goal, since he's attacking in October of 1812, is to do what? Okay, that's a bad question. Let me rephrase that question. His goal is very simple. If you're going to conquer another country, what do you have to take first? Their capital. What's the capital of Russia? Moscow. If it's October, how soon does he want to get there? Pretty quick, before winter gets there. And so he attacks, and he attacks and attacks and attacks, and the Russians just keep running away. By the time they get to Moscow, Napoleon's ready for this big battle. They get up in the morning and they march into Moscow, and there's nobody there. Alexander had abandoned the city. Told everybody in Moscow, leave the city. And everybody in Moscow left the city and they went to the countryside, to the Ural Mountains, into Siberia. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people flee. Where do they go? Anywhere but Moscow. And Napoleon walks into the Kremlin and he says, we took Moscow. Way to go, guys. And then he hears explosions all over the place. He looks out the windows and a fire breaks out. There's a fire over here and a fire over there and a fire over there, because the Russians had set explosive devices in Moscow so that the city would burn to the ground. And they lit their own capital city on fire to destroy it so that Napoleon would have nowhere to hang out in the wintertime. And so now they've destroyed Moscow, and Napoleon is trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? How do I handle this situation? And it becomes very, very tricky, because what's he going to do? Take his army and go back to France for the winter? Okay, that's too far to go, and it's too late. It's well into November at this point. Can't plod through all that snow. So he says, we're going to pitch camp right here in Moscow. We'll wait till the winter's over. Now, when you're camping, what are you camping in?